My friends, if you're someone who's been given the gift of a good woman's heart, remember this: consistency matters more than charm, effort means more than excuses, and attention is worth more than empty promises. Because once a good woman walks away, she doesn't come back looking for the love she once gave. She knows now that she's the one who deserves it most. When a man hurts a good woman, one of the first things that often goes unnoticed is the emotional cost she pays for being taken for granted. A good woman doesn't step into a relationship half-heartedly. She brings her full self, her time, her patience, her belief in the person she's choosing, and her effort to build something meaningful. But the problem arises when that effort becomes invisible, when her presence is assumed rather than appreciated, when her emotional labor is met with entitlement instead of acknowledgement. Let's understand this clearly. A good woman doesn't expect perfection. She doesn't need grand gestures or constant praise. But what she does need is to feel seen, to feel that her love isn't being poured into a bottomless well, to feel like her emotional investment is reciprocated, not ignored. When that doesn't happen, when she is consistently met with a lack of emotional return, she starts to feel depleted. Not all at once and not in a dramatic way, but day by day, her emotional tank runs dry because it's being drained faster than it's being refilled. Being taken for granted doesn't always come in the form of harsh words or obvious neglect. Sometimes it's the subtle things: forgetting important dates she remembered for you, not listening when she shares something vulnerable, showing more interest in distractions than in her day or how she's feeling. It's in the small choices to disconnect that send the loudest messages, and over time, that disconnection grows into something larger. It becomes a wall between two people who were once close. Now here's where the emotional cost gets even deeper. A good woman will often internalize the imbalance before she vocalizes it. She may question herself. Am I asking for too much? Maybe he's just busy. He does care, right? She'll rationalize, downplay, and try harder because that's who she is. She believes in effort. She believes in staying through the rough patches. So instead of pulling away at the first red flag, she leans in. She doubles down. She gives even more. And each time she does, but receives less in return, the emotional toll increases. What often gets overlooked is how exhausting this cycle is for her. She's not just loving someone who doesn't meet her halfway. She's also trying to protect the relationship from falling apart, often by sacrificing parts of herself, her needs, her voice, her peace. And while from the outside, it might look like she's still there, emotionally, she's being drained in ways that are hard to see unless you're really paying attention. That's the cost of being taken for granted. It's not loud. It doesn't always end in shouting matches or dramatic exits. It happens in silence, in her second guessing, in the way she starts to dim her light to avoid rocking the boat, in the way she carries the weight of a relationship that should have been shared. And here's the truth many men don't realize until it's too late. When a good woman starts to feel like a placeholder rather than a priority, she doesn't immediately leave. That's not how she's wired. But what she does start doing, without even realizing it, is emotionally detaching. She starts protecting herself. She starts bringing her full energy not out of revenge, but out of self-preservation. She starts to invest in herself again, not because she's selfish, but because she's tired of being empty in a relationship that should have filled her up. By the time she starts pulling back, by the time she's quieter, more distant, less affectionate, it's not because she doesn't care anymore. It's because she cared too much for too long without being met where she stood. That's the emotional cost of taking her for granted. You don't just lose her presence. You lose the version of her that gave deeply, that believed in the relationship wholeheartedly. And once that version of her is gone, you can't get it back just by saying you've changed. Because by then, she's learnt the hardest lesson of all, that sometimes the person you love the most is the one who taught you how to love yourself better. When a good woman begins to disconnect, it rarely happens in a dramatic, explosive moment. More often, it's a slow, almost invisible unraveling, a process so quiet that by the time it's noticeable, she's already gone emotionally. This is the phase where her energy and affection begin to fade, not because she wants them to, but because something inside her starts to feel unappreciated and emotionally unsafe. By nature, is deeply nurturing. She pays attention to the details, the moods, the silences. She knows how to hold space for the people she loves. But when she's continually met with indifference, inconsistency, or emotional absence, something begins to shift. It starts with small moments. Maybe she texts a little less. Maybe she doesn't initiate conversations like she used to. Maybe she stops asking how your day went, not because she doesn't care, but because she's realized you've stopped asking about hers. This withdrawal of affection isn't a strategy. She's not playing games. She's not trying to punish you. In fact, it's quite the opposite. She's trying to preserve herself. She's trying to protect her heart from being worn down by constantly pouring into someone who no longer pours back. And the truth is, it hurts her to pull back. It goes against her natural instinct to give, to love fully, to stay open. But continuing to give in the face of emotional neglect is a kind of self-betrayal she can no longer justify. When a woman begins to dim her energy, it's rarely out of malice, it's a defense mechanism. She's starting to realize that her presence is being mistaken for permanence, that no matter how much she gives, the effort isn't being matched. So she stops showing up in the same way, not abruptly, but subtly. Maybe she no longer shares her wins with you first. Maybe she hesitates before reaching for your hand. Maybe the way she looks at you, once full of admiration, is now clouded with doubt. You might notice these things and think she's changing, but what you're really witnessing is her response to feeling emotionally starved. It's a response to feeling alone while still being in the relationship. And that's the hardest kind of loneliness. When someone you love deeply is right next to you, but you feel emotionally distant from them. There's a misconception that women leave when they're angry, but more often than not, good women leave when they're tired of trying to be understood, tired of giving the benefit of the doubt, tired of explaining how they feel and having it brushed off or minimized, tired of feeling like they have to carry the emotional weight of two people just to keep the relationship functioning. Before she physically walks away, she emotionally withdraws. She stops investing the same energy into conversations, into intimacy, into future plans. And that withdrawal isn't passive. It's the result of hundreds of moments where she showed up but was met with silence. It's the outcome of countless situations where she gave love but received confusion, distance, or excuses in return. But what many don't realize is that this slow disconnection is actually her final effort. It's the last stage before detachment. She's not just pulling back to protect her heart, she's also quietly evaluating whether staying is still worth it. And if you don't recognize that shift, if you don't respond with presence, empathy, and real change, then eventually the silence between you becomes louder than any argument ever could. When a good woman begins to withdraw her affection, it's not out of nowhere, it's not random, it's not moodiness. It's the result of her feeling repeatedly unmet. And by the time you feel her absence, even though she's still physically there, her heart may already be gone. That kind of distance is hard to rebuild, not because she's unforgiving, but because she had to travel so far inside herself to find peace again. So if you ever notice a woman you love pulling back, not in anger, but in quiet resignation, pay attention. That's not the moment to match her distance. That's the moment to step forward, to meet her where she is, to show her that her love isn't being taken for granted. Because if you wait too long, what you'll be left with is the echo of someone who once gave everything until she realized she had to give it back to herself. There's a moment in every emotionally draining relationship when something inside a good woman shifts. It doesn't happen all at once, and it doesn't usually come with fireworks or ultimatums. It's more of a quiet awakening, a point where, after trying again and again, after giving without receiving, after explaining her needs only to be met with defensiveness or indifference, she begins to see things clearly. This is the turning point, and it changes everything. She may have given the benefit of the doubt. She may have assumed that maybe it's timing, stress, or just a temporary rough patch. She likely convinced herself that if she just hung in there a little longer, if she loved a little harder, things would improve. That's who she is. Hopeful, resilient, loyal. But even the most giving heart has a limit. And when she reaches it, she starts to view the relationship through a different lens. One that isn't clouded by what she hopes things could be, but instead focused on what things really are. That awakening often begins in subtle realizations. She starts replaying conversations in her head, times she expressed hurt and got no empathy, times she asked for connection and got avoidance, times she was made to feel like her feelings were a burden. She begins to see how many emotional knots she's tied herself into just to keep peace, just to avoid being misunderstood or dismissed. And when she reflects on how much of herself she's given and how little has been returned, something finally clicks. This isn't love anymore, it's labor. It's a powerful but painful realization when she sees that loving someone isn't enough to make them love you the right way in return, that no amount of effort on her end can make up for a lack of emotional maturity or willingness on his end. She begins to accept that trying to change someone, trying to convince them of her worth, is a war she no longer has the energy to fight. She wants peace, not a battlefield. But this clarity changes her. She may still be in the relationship for a while, but emotionally she's stepping into a new space, one where she values her needs, her happiness, and her emotional safety just as much as she once prioritized his. She starts making decisions based on what's healthy, not just what's familiar. Her heart might still ache and the love might still linger, but her mind is starting to lead. And once that happens, her actions begin to follow. This is the phase where the man starts to notice something's different. She's not reacting the way she used to. She's not trying to fix things or bridge the emotional gap. But by then, she's not disconnected out of anger. She's disconnected out of understanding. She finally sees the truth of the dynamic, and she realizes that staying might mean continuing to lose herself. Clarity gives her a sense of control again. It's no longer about begging for love. It's about choosing peace. It's no longer about being chosen. It's about choosing herself. And the longer she sits in that clarity, the stronger she becomes. She begins to imagine a life where she isn't constantly emotionally exhausted, a life where love feels safe, consistent, and reciprocal. And once she can see that vision clearly, going back to what hurt her is no longer an option. What follows this awakening isn't necessarily a dramatic exit. Sometimes she simply stops showing up in the same way. Sometimes she quietly begins to rebuild herself. But make no mistake, this moment of clarity is a point of no return. It's the beginning of a new chapter, even if the outside world hasn't caught on yet. By the time she gains this insight, she's no longer searching for signs that things will change. She's no longer trying to decode mixed messages or justify emotional absence. She sees it for what it is. And in that seeing, she reclaims her strength. That strength will carry her through the next phase of her life, one where she no longer settles for love that only asks but never gives. When a good woman has been hurt, truly hurt, by someone she deeply trusted, what follows is not just sadness or heartbreak. What follows is transformation. The pain doesn't simply break her down, it wakes her up. It pulls her inward, forces her to re-examine everything she tolerated, everything she gave without reciprocation, and everything she accepted that she never should have. And in that reflective space, a new version of her begins to form. Not colder, but wiser. Not hardened, but stronger. She begins to grow. This growth is often invisible at first. To the outside world, it might just look like she's quieter, more introspective, maybe a bit distant. But what's happening beneath the surface is a rebuilding process, brick by emotional brick. She starts to put herself back together, not in the same shape she was before, but in a way that better protects her heart. She no longer believes that giving endlessly is the definition of love. She learns that healthy love has boundaries, respect, and mutual care. She may have equated love with sacrifice. She may have been the one to always understand, always bend, always give the benefit of the doubt. But now she begins to redefine love, not as a place where she disappears for someone else's comfort, but as a space where she can be fully seen and fully respected. She starts to unlearn the belief that her love alone can change someone or make them value her more. Her love has miracles etched in it, that it's the only, and in doing so, she begins to reclaim the energy she once gave away so freely. This kind of growth is not easy. It's not glamorous. It comes with long nights of questioning, moments of self-doubt, and the painful realization that the person she wanted to build a future with wasn't equipped to meet her where she stood. But over time, those wounds become lessons. Those tears water the seeds of self-worth, clarity, and emotional resilience. She starts to see herself more clearly. She sees the strength it took to keep giving when she was being overlooked. She sees the beauty in her loyalty, her vulnerability, her willingness to stay and fight for something she believed in. But she also begins to see where she needs to protect herself better next time, where she must require more, not because she's demanding, but because she knows now that her peace is non-negotiable. One of the most profound shifts that happens in her growth is her changing standards. Where once she may have accepted emotional inconsistency or made excuses for poor communication, she now sees those behaviors for what they are: red flags. Not just signs of incompatibility, but signs that she's giving more than she's receiving. Signs that she's losing herself in trying to hold someone else together. And here's the key difference in her now. She no longer seeks validation from the person who hurt her. She no longer needs their apology, their closure, or their change to move forward. She gives herself the closure. She writes the ending to the story in a way that honors her truth. That's where her power lies now, in knowing that her healing is her responsibility and no one else's. This doesn't mean she becomes bitter or shuts down emotionally. On the contrary, she becomes more emotionally intelligent. She starts choosing more intentionally. She listens more to her intuition, pays attention to how people make her feel, and trusts her own emotional responses. Her growth doesn't mean she stops loving. It means she stops loving at the expense of herself. By the time she has moved through the pain and grown from it, she becomes someone who not only loves better, but chooses better. She's no longer drawn to emotional chaos disguised as passion. She's no longer tempted by inconsistency. She wants stability, honesty, and someone who speaks her emotional language without her needing to translate her needs all the time. That growth doesn't make her invincible, but it makes her rooted in her worth, in her standards, in her ability to walk away from anything that no longer serves her. And for anyone who crosses her path from that point forward, they'll meet a woman who knows who she is, what she brings, and what she will never again settle for. When a man loses a good woman due to his own actions, or more often, his inaction, what follows is not always immediate. It doesn't hit like a wave all at once. At first, he might feel relief or even justification. He might tell himself she was too emotional, too demanding, or that she overreacted. He may even believe that her leaving was a phase and she'll come back once she cools off. But in time, something starts to settle in. A silence that feels heavier than expected. A space she once filled with love and warmth that now echoes with absence. And that's when the reality starts to set in. She's really gone. What follows is often a slow burning realization, a kind of emotional rewind where he starts remembering the things she used to do. Not the big things, but the small ones. The way she checked in on his mental state when he didn't even know how to name it. The way she showed up even on days when he didn't deserve it. The thoughtful gestures. The way she gave her love freely, without holding score, without condition. And suddenly, the ordinary moments begin to feel extraordinary now that they're gone. That's the sting of loss. Not just that someone left, but that they left with pieces of comfort you didn't even know you relied on. The emotional labor she performed quietly. The patience she showed during his lowest. The time she forgave without making him feel small. And in that space where she once stood, he's now left facing himself. Not her version of him, but the reality of who he was in that relationship, what he overlooked, neglected, or chose not to fix. This realization is humbling because it forces him to confront the truth that love isn't just about presence, it's about participation. And while she was busy trying, healing, giving, and holding, he, emotionally unavailable or simply too distracted to notice how much she was slowly breaking inside. What hits hardest is the understanding that she didn't want to leave. She had to, not out of spite, but because staying any longer would have meant abandoning herself. It's often in her absence that he finally starts to feel the weight of her presence, the way she made life easier just by caring, the way she turns simple routines into moments of connection, the way she believed in him when he wasn't giving her much to believe in. And perhaps the most painful realization is this: she didn't leave because she stopped loving him. She left because she realized she was the only one truly loving. He begins to compare. He meets new people. Maybe he even moves on quickly. But something about those new connections feels different. There's no depth, no rooted loyalty, no emotional investment that compares to what she gave. And it's then he starts to understand. She wasn't just a good woman. She was his mirror. She reflected back the man he could have been if he had shown up fully, if he had done the work, if he had truly valued what he had while he had it. Regret begins to replace denial. And that regret doesn't just come from losing her. It comes from realizing how easy it could have been to keep her, how simple it would have been to listen more, communicate better, give more effort, or just appreciate her consistently. He sees now that what she needed was never unreachable. It was never complicated. She just wanted to feel seen, heard, and prioritized. But by the time all of this becomes clear, she's grown, she's healed. She's no longer the same woman who waited for him to show up. She's not bitter or vengeful. She's just unavailable. Emotionally, mentally, energetically, she's closed the door that he never thought she would. And now, the version of her that once lit up his world is gone. Not because she stopped loving, but because she finally started loving herself more. That's the final cost of hurting a good woman. It's not just losing her, it's losing the chance she gave over and over again. It's realizing you had something rare, something grounded in loyalty and love, and you mistook it for something that would always be there. But love like that has an expiration date when it's not reciprocated. And once it's gone, the silence she leaves behind speaks louder than anything she ever said while she was still trying. What happens when a man hurts a good woman isn't just a story of heartbreak. It's a story of awakening, transformation, and irreversible change. A good woman doesn't fall apart immediately. She unravels quietly, pulls away slowly, and in that space of pain, she begins to rebuild. What starts as emotional withdrawal becomes inner clarity. What feels like loss to him eventually becomes growth for her. She learns that love isn't sacrifice without return, that being good doesn't mean being endlessly patient with disrespect, and that real connection must be mutual. While he may only begin to realize her worth in her absence, she has already begun writing a new chapter in her life, one that doesn't include proving her value to someone who couldn't see it when it mattered. And by the time the full weight of what he lost sinks in, she's not waiting for an apology. She's not waiting to be chosen. She's already chosen herself. That's the lasting impact of hurting a good woman. Not just that she walks away, but that she rises stronger, clearer, and no longer available to the version of love that once broke her.